going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our, I guess, twice weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are back with more of the Brothers War, or our review of the Brothers War stories. So if you missed the last one we did on Monday, you should definitely go check it out. Link up top there in the little iCard. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. But today we are back with The Brothers War, Episode 2, The Beginning, by Miguel Lopez. My quick review at the top of this one is this story is a lot. It is a lot, and yet you should read it. It's going to take a long time, but you should take the time and you should read this story. That's my quick review.
Mine is bit of a cluster, but important nonetheless, I think.
Fair. Yeah, and we'll get more into it, obviously, in the full review itself, but if that is interesting enough to you and you have not gotten a chance to read the story yet, or if for whatever reason you feel that you need a refresher, I think on this one, a refresher is going to be a little rough. If you've read it already, and now you're going to go back to do it again, but no judgments whatsoever either way. But if you have not read the story yet and you do want to or are interested, the top link in the description down below will take you to the story so that you can read it for yourself. We try to remove as many barriers as possible to get you all to the story so that you can read it. I can say, I had mentioned in the last video that we did that the stories at the time that we were reviewing them were not yet up on the story page on the website. Now I can say that they are, at least the last time I checked. And it's been a while since we've seen any like glitches or anything else there, so you can just go to the story tab on the website to check it out, but the link in the description, it's right there. It's super easy. Mm-hmm. But I guess to read the rest of the stories, if you're going to do that in advance of us putting them out, you can not find them down below, but on the story tab. So regardless, whatever the case may be, we would love it if you do go to read that story. We would then love it, of course, if you would come back here and join us as we go over the full review itself. You can probably tell from the timestamps down below. I don't know how long this is going to take. Such a long story. We're going to do our best to be brief, I suppose, but no promises. We'll try. But before we actually go on to the full review itself, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get a little bit of administrative stuff out of the way first. If you're unaware, you're at Geek for All. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. If you're enjoying the things that we're putting out, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, including more of these JaARs in the coming weeks. We would love, love, love for it to be 2 a week. We will try our best. I don't think it's ever worked flat, but you know, we have lives and jobs and we're going to do our best. But if you sub and ring that bell like I mentioned, you'll get notifications as soon as those videos come out. And as a bonus, you'll get notifications whenever we go live, which is every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on this channel. We also have other channels, Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. Links down in the description box below, so you should definitely go check that out also. 3 new videos a week over on Video Games for All. Really cool stuff going on there. We are going towards the end of the month of October at this point, so Spooky Month is here and is also ending. This Friday we have the finale of our Spooky Month stream of Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem for the GameCube. We have already beaten the game fully the first time through. There are 3 different paths to take, so I have taken the time painstakingly over the last week to beat the game 2 more times, and then a final time for like the New Game Plus or whatever. And so when we go into this week, we will be able to see what the entirety of the game looks like in those other paths, etc. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the whole playlist is over on Video Games for All, so you can check the link, like I said, in the description down below. Now that all of that is out of the way, thank you for bearing with us. We really appreciate it. And don't forget, likes and shares go a very long way. And to transition back into this video, please don't forget that anything at all that we talk about today, whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether there's something that we missed, we always, always, always want to hear from you in the comments down below. Definitely leave your thoughts, super important. So, And again, like, especially if we missed something. If there was something that you thought was really important about this story and we didn't talk about it, we want to hear from you. Let us know.
Right.
For sure. Okay, so last time we spoke, which was on Monday, our video on Monday talked about the end, which was episode 1. So episode 1 was the end, episode 2 is the beginning. Now, I surmised from the fact that it was called the end and then the beginning, that because we were starting at 69 AR, which is after the war had ended, I presumed that the beginning was going to be us transitioning from the end of the war and hearing what was going on with Caleb and Krug after the Urza and Mishra fighting had subsided and the Silex blast had occurred and everything got messed up, the cataclysm, if you will. I thought that the beginning was going to then refer to, okay, you've seen the end, now let's go back to the beginning and actually start the Brothers' War stories. I was very wrong.
Correct.
Which honestly I was somewhat pleased by. Like Amy mentioned, it's a bit of a cluster, so not fully happy, but I was happy because the way that the end story ended left it wide open as to like what's going to happen now. And so we actually got to find that out here, and the title of the beginning was a bit of a misnomer, but also like metaphorical, which I appreciated, I suppose. It just was very confusing when, I guess, judging a book by its cover with what the titles were. And
just the end of the era that they were in, and then a new beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And especially for Kayla. I mean, it was for the people of Penregon, for the eastern side of Dominaria, but also for all of Dominaria with just the Ice Age in general encroaching on everything. So, yeah, absolutely. It was very well done in that regard. And speaking of very well done, the first thing I wrote about this, besides the fact that we're still in 69 AR, which, for people who are unfamiliar, that is the Argivian Reckoning, and it's the way of telling time, or the instead of like years, or AD versus BC, or BE and CE, the way that we do things here on Earth. This is how they do things on Dominaria / all of the planes of magic, kind of. But this is from 69 AR, which is still based on where we are in current world magic in the past. So, but anyway, besides that, the first thing that I wrote here is that the writing was insanely good at the beginning of this story. Holy crap. I mean, talk about being drawn in for a story that frankly was way too long. I mean, my God, this story was long. This story could have, you said 3? Like, could have been 3 stories?
I think so.
It was so long.
Or at least it had 3, in my opinion, very clear, separate sections to it that had no business being in the same story together.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Perhaps they were each too short to be their own story, but then just make them longer. Like, this doesn't make sense as one story, in my opinion.
I definitely agree. But again, as has been the complaint all along with anybody that I've seen talk about it for any of the stories, really, since whichever the first one was where we returned to the free stories, limiting yourself to 5 shoots yourself in the foot. It has almost every time, if not every single time. And it seems like this is just the path that they're going with, and they're just soldiering on no matter what anybody says. So F us, I guess, but regardless, come on. Like, this story should have been able to be broken up into 2 stories, because it was worth being broken up into 2 stories. Sometimes, when we complain about stories being too long, we're like, you could cut out this, and you could cut out this, and you could cut out this. I'm not even necessarily asking for that. There were parts in here that felt awkward, but I think Miguel Lopez did such a good job with the writing here that I was invested the whole time. It's just like, speaking of time, who the hell has that much time to sit down in one sitting and read that much of a story? Besides the fact that the way that they're doing things now, speaking of issues of how they're doing things, The way that they're doing things now, the last story that we reviewed, The End, and this story, The Beginning, were both put out on the same day, and then the next day, 2 more stories were put out. So it's not even like you had time to sit and decide whether or not you were going to read this, because you had a day to read 2 stories, and this one was super long. Thank God it was written well. Thank God. Because if not, I don't know how we would have gotten through it, to be completely honest with you. Because it took us a little bit of behind the scenes. It took us 2 days. We typically do these shows, or these readings and then these shows in the evenings. It took us like 2 hours to get through half the story.
Just half.
Right. And you are more than welcome to leave in the comments that means that we're not strong readers and you got through this in 2 hours. That's perfectly fine. The way that we do things here is I read the story aloud as opposed to the 2 of us sitting there and trying to read it or reading it separately. I read it aloud, and then along the way we can stop and like talk to each other about specific points, or like obviously I write down notes because we have to talk about things.
Right.
But still, 2 hours for half the story is a lot. That's a lot of story. So again, thank God it was written well, but holy shit, should this have been broken up into multiple stories.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is
Yes,
that the story had really amazing writing in the beginning. And then once you started to get to the point where they had to start cramming all of the things in, that stopped being the case. It stopped being great writing because now there wasn't time for great writing. It was cram all of the things in. And like you said before, that happens every time because they don't allow for the correct number of stories for the story that exists. The story almost exists in the ether, and then you've got to kind of grab it and put it into stories.
Yeah.
Right? So if the story kind of like existed in the ether, then the pieces that they brought down and threw it all into one story, it shouldn't have been like that. It should have been like, okay, this section is the stuff that goes into story 1. This section is the stuff that goes into story 2. And this section is the stuff that goes into story 3. And then we write story around it.
Yeah.
You know? Instead, they were like, well, I'm going to start off this story really nicely and draw people in, like you said.
It really did.
And then I cease the actual writing and I just cram all the things into the story. And when it starts to explode, I just, push it in more.
And it's ironic that anyone would think that this had things crammed into it because it was so long.
Yep.
I have to say...
Because it was 3 different stories in one story.
Yeah.
So, of course, having stuff crammed into it still means it's a super long story that's kind of unnecessary because it's one story that should be 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little insane. But, that's not Miguel's fault.
No.
It's the fault of the fact that they've decided how many stories they're going to do, and it's the same every time, regardless of whether the story would dictate that it ought to be something different.
And again, I will reiterate for the umpteenth time, because I have to, but I'm sorry to those of you who've heard me say it a million times, they have also done it in... While they took a break for the weekend, they released 10 stories in 5 days. Technically 7, because they didn't put stories out on a Saturday or a Sunday. But they did 2 stories a day for 5 days. Does that make sense to anybody? Because it doesn't make sense to me. And if you didn't get that from the fact that now we're cramming in these videos to 2 a week, which we used to be able to do 1 a week and give the story the time that it deserved to read, to digest, and to review. And now, and again, even if we weren't reviewing it, right? Because maybe you disagree. Maybe you're like, no, this is amazing. But think about the fact that now, because at the time that we're filming this, all of the stories are out. They're done already, right? So there are people out there who have read all 10 stories already, despite the fact that we're reviewing the second one.
Right.
In a week after the first one came out, and the second one, obviously. But now you have to wait however long until the next one comes out. And by the next one, I mean...
Our videos.
No, I mean Phyrexia All Will Be One's stories. Right? You have to wait that long. Why? Why can't they put it out sporadically throughout the process? Does it make sense? No. Do the stories preview cards anymore? No. So what's the purpose? It's not like you're hiding things in your story that you don't want to give away. Like, Magic is a card game, right? Obviously. I'm not telling anybody anything new here. Mm-hmm. But let's discuss maybe the reasonings why you wouldn't, or you would want to hold back your stories. If it was possible to speculate based on the story what abilities the new Teferi card from this set might have, for example. If you could do that, then maybe you would want to keep your story back. Because maybe the story would indicate, oh crap, Teferi's part green, right? Or something like that. Well, that's unheard of. If you heard that a Teferi Planeswalker was coming out, you would not assume he was green. So, okay, well, how will that affect Standard? How will that affect Modern? How will that affect Legacy? It will also depend on what his abilities are. Can you tell what his abilities are going to be based on the story? Okay, so from that regard, then maybe I could entertain that you wouldn't want to put your story out because savvy individuals who would read this story would be able to say, Teferi's going to be green. By the way, I'm picking this example because it's absurd. Just throwing that out, if anybody was curious. I'm picking it because it's absurd and not something where it's going to be like, Joe's amazing, how did he guess that? No. But that if Teferi is going to be part green, you now are going to be able to speculate, oh crap, okay, new Standard, when Brothers War comes out, green is going to be big. Let's buy out all the semi-good green cards that are super cheap right now but are going to be super expensive. It's not going to happen. No. It's not.
Like, doing anything based on assumptions like that would be so out of left field. You'd be in a different baseball field.
And honestly, if that were the case, I mean, it would launch careers for sure, because you'd have those people being able to create content, by the way, for making speculations of like, well, when I read the story, there was this line that means that Teferi's going to be green, and so I recommend that you go out and buy all the Essica's chariots, because Modern is going to, whatever. Like, hey. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's how deep you would have to go to be able to, like, what else? Why else is it a bad idea? I just don't get it.
I don't know.
Anyway, let's talk about the story itself, shall we? Because there's a lot to it. It's so funny. Because we read the story so long ago, I'm reading about Tawnos and I'm like, wow, Tawnos was in this story? Yeah. Because even though he died halfway through, in the beginning of the story, he definitely was there. So... Tawnos is still here. Tawnos, for those of you who are unaware, Urza's apprentice who lived through the Silex Blast somehow. Kayla keeps saying he basically came back from the dead.
Yeah.
Because he was taken out of the coffin that he hid in, refrigerator, Indiana Jones style, basically.
Yeah.
For the nuclear blast that went off. Equally as plausibly, I'm sure.
Right, sure.
And then... and then Urza took him
just
out.
Came right out into the radiation and was like, I'm good. It's like, yeah, if you went into a fridge and avoided the blast, you coming out of the fridge right after that would still make you very exposed to radiation.
You just don't get it. The fridge was lead-lined. A magician did it. It's fine. He's fine.
And he's lead-lined as well, apparently. So instead of dying of radiation poisoning, he's going to die of lead poisoning.
Absolutely. So anyway, yes, Tawnos brought back, shows up to Kayla, and basically, as we discussed last time, right, the story ends with Kayla basically becoming the thing that she feared the most and saying to Thanos, okay, those machines that I somehow let you rebuild,
Right.
despite the fact that it was my...
For some random reason that they didn't really explain.
Nope. Despite the fact that it was my husband's designs and I hate you and him for them because it killed my son, inadvertently, but still, or like tangentially, but still.
Yeah, but not only for that reason. I mean, she also is a human with compassion, so she probably then also identifies with the other mothers whose sons got killed by
correct.
the war.
For sure. And as a leader, right, she would have heard from those mothers or seen the devastation of the people in general morale, individual morale, whatever the case may be.
Not just morale, but just, what it actually does to the economy.
I was just going to say, workers having been killed as well, and industry needing to still be, which is why, I guess, she was able to justify to herself rebuilding these mechs, or allowing Thanos to build these mechs. And now in this story, since Kayla at the end of the last one was basically like, yep, switch them over, they gotta be, machines of war again. And Thanos is like, okay, let's do it. I'm ready. I'm excited. Let's do it. And he gets to his workshop and he sees that these things are becoming tools of war again. And he's like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And so he finally is coming to the realization that Kayla came to at the beginning of the last story before she was just like, well, never mind. We'll do whatever you say. That makes sense. And it was because he realized that the Power Stones were running out. I mean, among other things, right? But one of the things that he talked about was that the Power Stones were running out. And when the Power Stones ran out, well, guess what? What was the last war about? Power Stones. So when these Power Stones run out that are powering these tools that then became weapons of war, and hopefully after the war would be able to go back to being tools again,
right?
What would happen when they ran out? The people would be clamoring for those tools again because they would need them, because they had become so reliant on them for their industry and their economy and whatever. And then there would be more fighting and more whatever. And so Thanos kind of, like, not literally saw the future, but could envision what the future would become. And
because he had already seen it once.
Yeah. Despite the fact that, again,
now he's in the future.
Yeah.
And he can look back at the past and say, it led to this future, which is an endless cycle of war. And I don't want to be part of it anymore.
Yeah, and it was weird because he was in that section, like, trying to justify it to himself. He was like, well, it makes sense. Like, we had to do it, and this is why. But also, oh my God, what did we do? Right? So it was a little weird that was how he went about it.
I don't know that is weird, because I think if you were actually in that position, you would automatically rationalize it to yourself. And then you would give yourself one more second to think about it. And as soon as you did, you'd be like, fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. And when he did think about it, he's sitting in his office looking down, and it's funny, the way that the story mentioned it, it kind of, when you were in the story from Thanos' perspective, it was him talking about what he was going to do and the fact that he finally had his own original idea. That was the crux of that section. He finally had an idea of his own, an original idea, and he was going to implement it. And he ripped out his original designs from his notebook of, like, animals, like animal mechs.
Yeah.
That were not really going to be tools. They were not really going to be units of war. They were just animal mechs that he had made that seemingly, from the way that he mentioned it, were the things that had kind of clued Urza into the fact that, hey, this one's special. Right, this is the one that I want as my apprentice so that we can work together to build these machines so I can go to war with my brother. Right? Thanos didn't always want that, but because Urza was so powerful, so charismatic, whatever the case may be, that's what led Thanos down the path that he was on. And he finally, when he got to a moment where he could stop and look at what he had done and where he was going,
Yeah.
he took his original designs of the animals, and then there was a fire, right? It was very, what's the term? Like, inactive language? What's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of it. Folks can leave it in the comments down below. But it very much like not giving a subject to the statement. Just like, a fire began, as opposed to like Thanos set the fire. It was like a fire was happening, you know, like it was like very a step back.
I didn't feel like it was like that.
It basically was like Thanos took his designs. He had his first original idea, and then it was like nobody saw the fire in his office
Right.
until later. So it wasn't like it was.
He put them in his pocket.
Yes.
And then no one saw the fire until later.
Yeah, and then there was a fire, like, you know. So
when Thanos was already gone.
They didn't say that either, because again, you were up to the point where Kayla realizes it. You're supposed to speculate that he dies in that fire because he's in that room again. Maybe it's supposed to cast doubt. Maybe it's supposed to cast doubt as to whether or not he's alive.
It didn't for me. Yeah, no. It didn't cast any doubt as to where the fire came from, and it didn't cast any doubt as to what happened to him.
Yes. It just didn't say it. It wasn't like Thanos took the designs, then set a fire and ran away, right? It didn't say that. It was like he took his designs, had his first original idea, no one saw the fire. You know what I mean? Like it was very much like...
I mean, it did say, cast these into the sea. Right?
No, so he whispered it, but he was just repeating what Kayla had joked about in the last story.
Oh, okay.
Remember, she made that joke.
I didn't realize. I thought he was actually telling someone to cast them into the sea.
He was whispering it to himself and repeating what Kayla had said, but Kayla was joking. And he thought she was being serious because it was weird. In the last story, not weird, sorry, I liked it. In the last story, in the beginning, Kayla was saying all these things that Thanos was like, oh, haha, and she wasn't laughing, and he was like, oh, sorry. And then at the end of the story, she's like, you know, okay, we're going to go do these things with the mechs, and then you're going to cast them into the sea. And Thanos was like, oh, okay. And she was like, I'm messing with you. So then he was like, oh, so it was literally the opposite, where originally he was laughing at things that she wasn't joking about, and now he was taking fully seriously something that she was joking about. So it was the bookend of the story to be able to do that. And so then in this one, when he was like, cast them into the sea, he was just repeating what she had said, but kind of reassessing to the fact that, no, that made perfect sense.
Right.
And while she may have been joking, he was no longer.
Right.
And so he knew what he had to do.
Right. And he's not going to cast them into the sea, but he sure is going to burn them.
Yeah. Now, so yes, then Kayla figures it out. Now, I was a little confused because then the story jumps. So going into what Amy said was like a bit of a cluster, right? Oh, and Kayla says, basically, like blames Thanos. And the act that Thanos committed of burning down his factory, which had all of the notes and the plans and the blueprints, if you will, in it for these machines, she said that act alone was what was going to be Pendragon's end, the town that they were in. You know, maybe it wouldn't happen in a year or 2 or 5, but that this act alone would be the end of Pendragon.
Right, not her action of deciding to go to war again when her whole life had been her hating the fact that they were in a war to begin with.
Yep. No, instead it was the removal of the ability to make more of these things. Despite the fact that, I mean, he had mentioned in the first story, Thanos had mentioned in the first story, that there were places to find, like, caches of Power Stones. But they would have had to go out and seek those out, and that, I guess, alone could have led to more conflict as well. So, like, anyway, by him destroying the factory and making it so that they couldn't make any more mechs, even if they had found more Power Stones, she said was what spelled the end. The other thing is, I mean, I guess we live here in this world, but I am not okay with the fact that it just kept saying that, like, anytime one of these mechs, like, broke down or whatever, they just literally walked it into the bay. and just like dumped it out the back into the water, it's like, how the hell are you going to do it? You're just ruining the ecosystem by introducing all this foreign metal and like whatever other equipment. Like, I guess if it's run by Power Stones, then it's magic, so it doesn't need like lubricant and like oils and things like that to like help it run. But like, I guess
I would think it still probably does.
So would I, but like I said, if it's magic, then it's magic, and they could probably explain it away. Then it's just metal that you're casting into the water, which again, I mean, as it rusts and oxidizes, it's still probably not ideal either to keep in an ecosystem.
Plus, it's taking up a lot of space because they are large.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're displacing the water and or anything that might live in that general area. Yep. Yeah, not okay.
Yeah.
Not smart and not okay.
There are a lot of real-world parallels here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Endless cycles of war, huge amounts of pollution, migration from a war-torn area.
None of those things ever happened.
No. Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
Not real. It's all fake.
Yeah. The war with the Talites lasted a day, or the conflict with the Talites lasted a day, except for the fact that, like, the internal conflict of them fighting, like, those that had infiltrated and were giving information back, like the cultists, they called them cultists. The cultists were the ones who, I think, caused more of an issue than the encroaching force. Because the encroaching force were stopped by the mechs. It was pretty easy. Like, there were fighters there and there were mechs there, and they barely got through the gate or whatever. They all just, like, died. Yeah. But the cultists were the ones in the city who just started setting fires, which, by the way, Tawnos is a lucky bastard, because it seemed like, based on when we were reading from Tawnos' perspective, that he was not aware that there were fires being set in the city at the same time that he lit his factory on fire. But, you know, sometimes... Yeah, sometimes you get lucky as hell, I guess. He lit a fire in his factory at the same time that cultists were lighting fires all over the place in the city. So they just kind of assumed it was one of the other fires until Kayla shows up later like a fire investigator and is like, well, the fire originated here, but nobody else was hurt. And so, like, unlike all the other fires, it couldn't have been set by the Talites. It was Tawnos. Yep. And I bet he got away. And then later on, I'll be proven correct. And so, okay.
Sure.
So then it jumps from 69 AR to 79 AR. That's a 10-year jump. But when the last story started at 69 AR, it was in 69 AR. It gave us little hints of things that had occurred during the war and the effect of the cataclysm and that the Silex blast occurred, whatever. But now you have... This story started 69 AR and was set in 69 AR. Then it says 79 AR. And then spends so much time talking about what occurred from 69 AR to 79 AR that it wasn't actually 79 AR at all. You know, you could have written 69 to 79 AR, right? Like, that's an option. You just put the other numbers and a dash. You're typing this. So it was very strange because the timeline was so all over the place here, where it's like, we predicted the end, we found out about a place to the west. I wrote this stuff down. There were rumored cities that were free from the winter, the encroachment of the ice to the west. It was a rumor that her scouts had heard while they were out. And so the story tells us that then all the people left Penregon, and that was the end of Penregon in 79 AR, but then it talked about, so it mentions that then all these people migrate out of Penregon.
Yeah, I said war-torn areas before, but I guess that's more of a climate thing. Which, again, maybe if you weren't constantly polluting the bay with mechs, maybe there wouldn't be as bad of a climate change.
A climate issue...
I know it was because of the Brothers' War.
Yes. Well, and it was a climate thing and also resources. One does lead to the other, but yeah, it's a lack of resources or yes, climate disaster. So, oh, that was the other thing. Sorry, with the Thanos thing, you were very, you were like, really? When Kayla finds out that Thanos left, she called him selfish.
Yeah.
For leaving, and then again blamed him for the fall of, which you kind of went into already,
Yeah.
but like blamed him for the reason why.
I was like, well, it's easy to blame him now that he's not around, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't face the fact that it was your issue. And she can't face it, right? That makes perfect sense. You spent so much time hating him for, and your husband, for being a party to, or the cause of, this war that took your son from you and ruined your home, right? And not just ruined your home, but your kingdom, right? That you kind of rule over. And now you're doing the same thing. You can't face that. You have to blame him. Because you're not going to be able to deal, at least in that moment, with the fact that it's now your fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you're the one making this choice. And so it's easy to blame him because he burned a factory and ran off. But, 10 years from now, you're going to realize it was you being a jackass. You're the asshole. So,
yeah. Yeah. So this is...
enough to be able to say, I figured he was probably alive. Tell him about me. So she took those 10 years. Was it just 10 years?
69 to like 80 is when she was talking to her grandson.
So
yeah.
She took that period of time and used it to forgive Thanos for something he didn't do, and seemingly forgive herself for something she did do.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk about that right now, because basically here's the timeline as I understand it from the story, right? And I'm talking about the order that it was written in the story compared to the actual timeline of what was supposedly occurring during all this time, 69 to 79, right? It seems like 79 AR was written and bolded to let you know, okay, this is when we're talking about 79 AR. But then it tells you about finding out about the land to the west, and Kayla recommending that they all go because Pendragon is not going to last, and then also realizing that the ice is coming. Right, she hears from her scouts that the ice is just like...
Winter is coming.
Yes, winter is coming. It's encroaching and encroaching and encroaching, and they mention that summer is shortening and shortening every year, and winter is lengthening and lengthening by effect of that. And the ice is literally like moving and cresting over things and just overtaking the entire area.
Yeah.
Right? Now, she literally says in the story that the ice was coming, although it was generations away.
I think what that means is it will be generations before no one can live there.
Right. But yet she flat out says, or the story flat out says, the end of Pendragon came 10 years later or whatever in 79 AR, because they hear about greener lands and the ice is coming in generations.
Right. So it's the end of the kingdom because they're migrating to an area where they can start a new life, finish out the lives of the people who are now alive, right? And foster new lives for new generations long before being driven out should that ice encroach its way all the way across to where they've migrated.
Yeah. Which, that we find out later, she thinks it and knows it eventually will, because, it's gonna. But, But yeah, they could have delayed it much longer because they were already dealing with snow and stuff around 69 plus, and yet these lands out west were green. Like it literally said greener lands. So, but then okay, so here's the timeline. The story mentions finding out about the lands to the west. Then Kayla despairs hearing about the ice and is like becoming so like depressed and upset about that. Then there's a full interlude of her gaining magical powers and studying her abilities and learning how to utilize them. And then everyone leaves. But that whole time it says it's 79 AR. But it's not. Because what they're implying is that everyone leaves in 79 AR. I don't think that all happens in 1 year. All 79 AR.
No, yeah,
because
it
it
takes
mentions...
the 10 years to occur.
Yeah. So it's like, but then that's not 79 AR, right? Like, why would you say it there? Why would that be where you say 70? It just was very, very confusing.
They should have said 279 AR.
Yeah. 69 to 70. Like, you don't have to define what year it occurs, right? There are definitely some people, and I do not disparage these individuals, but there are definitely some people who would be like, well, what year was it that they found out about? What year was it that this happened? I'm not that guy. I'm just not. If they didn't have years here at all, I'd be okay. Like, I might ask when it occurred, but I wouldn't need definitive years listed. You know what I mean? Like, in the 10 years that you know, in between when Tawnos left and when the city fell because everybody left it, like, see, that's what I was gonna do. God bless you. God bless you.
Ugh.
Little do we know, it's a challenge video. We put sneeze powder in here first.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it just was very odd, the choice of timing there. I don't fully understand it. I don't know why they mentioned it that way as opposed to just listing it a different way. That's all.
Yeah. They could have said that it took 10 years.
Yep.
All of what they were talking about took 10 years.
Yes.
But I think it's important for them to say that it took 10 years. As opposed to just stating all of the things and having you go, okay, but how long did this take?
No, I agree.
Was this all in the same year? Did this take a couple years? Like, I think it helps provide some context to be like, this is 10 years.
Yeah.
You know? But the way that they said it wasn't really correct or wasn't really effective.
Mm-hmm. There were some quotes here that you asked me to write down, which I thought were very good as well, but I know you specifically wanted to talk about them. Talking about Kayla. So a she here is Kayla. In public, she was an example to all. A stoic without stoicism's chill. A martyr who did not die, but burned as a beacon.
Yeah. Powerful, amazing writing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. For
Again,
sure.
Like, there was a whole nice big section, and a little bit sprinkled throughout later in the first part of the story, where the writing was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't really get to shine, I feel, because there was so much other things crammed in there that shouldn't have been there.
Sorry. Go ahead.
But, yeah, I think this is a great quote. So.
Yeah. And again, like we always talk about, realize where the best parts came from. That first section in the beginning was Tawnos talking about himself or being introspective. That was the first great section of writing. This section is discussing Kayla and her life and her struggles, mentally, personally. And then the last section that I really enjoyed was her talking with and saying goodbye to her grandson. Those were phenomenal writing sections. Yeah. But it's people. It's character work. That's the shit, first of all, that I live for. So, like, when I read stories. So, if that's not you, maybe you didn't like these sections, and you are more than welcome, as always, to let us know in the comments down below. Be like, you know what, guys? I didn't actually really like those. Let us know. But for me, I think those were the best parts of the story. Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the first great section of the story, writing-wise, was just the description like the opening description.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Where it wasn't characterization.
Fair.
But then after that, it was Thanos. It was, yeah, it was exactly what you said.
Yeah, super well done. And again, I mean, I've mentioned this. This is my philosophy on it, maybe our philosophy on it, but I don't want to speak for you. Let me know. But my philosophy on it always has been when Wizards lets the writers kind of have their way with the characters and letting them characterize these characters, as opposed to trying to duplicate characterization that other people have written, it goes really well.
Yeah.
Because these authors are professionals, right? They're brought in for that reason. They're professional authors. So they're able to take these characters and literally breathe life into them. So that you read these stories and you're like, oh my god, I love you, right? I love what Thanos ended up saying and feeling like. You thought that the grandson was adorable. That like interaction with the two of them was amazing.
Yeah.
And the stuff that Kayla went through was heartbreaking.
Right.
But like, it's words on a page, right? Like anybody who loves reading will tell you that, right? That you will fall in love with characters, you will hate characters, like, but that's good writing. That's what you want. As opposed to reading a story and going, that doesn't sound like Soren. Why is Nissa saying that? You know what I mean? Like, this is the stuff where these authors shine because they're given the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. And really what that means is writers, because they're writers, are amazing at making characters compelling. What they are not amazing at is working with years and years of old material to have to, out of the blue now, learn these characters and then force the characterization upon them that has been dictated to them by that.
Yep.
And is being dictated to them by corporate America, essentially.
Sure.
Like, you've got these two, like, things feeding in now that don't necessarily jive with what they would do to make that character compelling.
Yep.
Which makes it really hard for them to make that character compelling.
Yeah.
To an audience.
Sure.
So then we read that and we go, what? Because they're using old writing that somebody else did that they didn't know. They didn't know that person. They didn't know the writing. They didn't know the characters. And they're being told by people who aren't writers, oh, you need to include XYZ in the story.
Right, because we have to hit these beats.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now they're trying to take this, which is already not great, because they're not interested in it. They're not enveloped in it. They're, you know, it's coming from a different space, right? And then they're taking this over here, which is coming from another completely different space, you know, headspace of people who aren't writers, basically, telling them what to do. And now they have to, like, force them together and interweave them in a way that they fit in the box of the story, which means set number of stories, this is how long you have to write it, you know, and just make it all fit, whether or not that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it sucks. I really feel for these authors because it's clear in moments that these writers are amazing. And if they were able to kind of shed away a lot of these other things, they could write an amazing story. It's just that they have to have these two things dictated to them every time they go to write these stories. And so, you know, they try to put as much of their good pieces in there as they can.
Yeah.
But there's only so much of that they can do when they then have to cram in all the things and have to try and use characters that have characterizations already and try to make that make sense for, you know, because it's existing characters.
Yeah. So, speaking of good writing...
And continuity as well.
Yeah. So speaking of good writing, another line that you really appreciated, not that I didn't, but another line that you wanted me to write down. So this is Kayla when she was dealing with her despair over the ice.
Well, we really didn't talk about the last line.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say about that one, that's really cool, that line, because it's almost like, I mean, that line doesn't necessarily let you know whether or not this is just how the public perceives Kayla, or if it's how Kayla also feels.
Yeah.
Right? But it's just, you know, she's got the regalness of stoicism without being cold. So she's a loving, regal, graceful leader.
Yeah.
You know? And then, what's the second part?
A martyr who did not die, but burned as a beacon.
So she's loved by her people. And understood by her people to a degree, and she has a like an aspect of who she is that will kind of remain in history, kind of become a legend almost, is what that line means to me, right? That you know, her reputation is gonna, like, you know, proceed, you know, and just like make her, she's gonna become a historical figure. And she's well loved by her people, and like I said, it's vague enough where it doesn't say whether or not it's just the people feel this way about her, or whether she feels that way in that moment, like whether she really truly embodies that. And then later we come to find that if she was embodying that, it didn't last.
Yeah, it was literally the next line. The next sentence after this was basically, like, I don't remember the exact wording because we didn't write it down, but it was the something to the effect of, like, you know, that was all a lie. Or, you know, like when, because basically when she got home, every night she was freaking out more and more and more. And in fact, that's where the next line comes in.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize it was so soon after.
Yeah.
So that changes it, right? Because it's, then you know this is how the public perceives her, but then behind closed doors, you know, that's not how she's feeling.
Yeah.
She's completely emotionally affected by the responsibilities and the tragedies of being a ruler.
Right. And in fact, again, just how solid that writing was, right? You wanted to write that sentence down because it's just so good. And so describing what she's going through a few paragraphs later or whatever, the next line is, a white hot rage screamed into a pillow, hoping that no one could hear. She thought she could never empty herself of the pain, the anger, the grief. Every morning she awoke with her lungs raw, jaw throbbing, and head aching.
Yeah. And I had you write that down because that's a line I feel. That's a line I've experienced, right? And probably a lot of people have. And maybe a lot of other people also have not, which would be great. Right?
That's the goal.
That's
yeah,
the
sure.
But yeah, I mean, growing up in an abusive home, that's your life. You go to bed crying yourself to sleep or screaming, and you wake up in physical pain from having done that to yourself. And then you've got to make it through the next day and do it again. It's torture.
Yeah. And the contrast of the woman that her people see and what she has to do to be able to be that woman.
Right.
You know, it's the classic line of like, you don't know what people are carrying around. You don't know how many people you come across on a day-to-day basis, at work, on the street, whatever, who did scream their lungs raw every night.
Right.
You just don't know. And it could be a lot more people than you think. Right? But yeah, I mean, talk about amazing writing and talking about what happened to her and what she was having to deal with. And this was the stress and the frustration with what was happening to her people, what was happening to her city, and that she was internalizing all of that because she's a good leader.
Yeah.
And so as opposed to going, oh, well, it was Tanos' fault, so I don't have to feel bad about it. No, she's devastated because her people are struggling and she can't help.
Right. And she is also struggling with her own struggles, and those came from the same place. The struggles of her people and the struggles that she has came from the fact that her husband or boyfriend or significant
I believe they were married. I believe it was husband, but regardless.
Whatever it was.
Yeah, sure.
Was the cause of the war and all of the anguish that all of them now have to live through, and he doesn't even have to live through it because he's gone.
Yeah, first she thought he was dead, then she found out he wasn't dead, but regardless, he ain't around.
So, I mean, there's a lot of devastation that comes with realizing that he did this to them and then fucked off. Whether it means he died or, we kind of learned from Tanos that maybe he's not dead.
Right. He rose again or whatever 5 years later.
But at that point, you don't even give a damn because you hope you never see him again. But
yeah.
So all the grief and devastation that comes from all of that, and then to have to start another war again with the knowledge and the pain still left from the first war that you had to live through. It's just, it's devastating. I mean, it's actually just it's one of those things that understanding it is probably tough unless you've literally done it.
Yeah.
Because it's just the level of pain has got to just be unbearable.
Yeah. Then there is, again, I think this goes to what you were talking about having to cram things in. Kayla, I guess, has to get magic somehow. And so we've got to have that in this story somewhere.
Right.
So how do they do it? I mean, I get that she's angry, she's frustrated, and it mentions it's a white-hot rage. And that white-hot rage comes out by her gaining the ability to manipulate fire. And she does so by burning her hand, or I should say when she does so, she burns her hands, she blisters them up until she can control it and wrap her hands as she gets better with it. But that section was so weird.
Yeah.
And especially...
They didn't explain it at all. It just came out of nowhere.
And especially because, again, in the back of my head, I'm sitting there going, but we've already been told that they're leaving, but they haven't left yet, and now she's dealing with magic, but we're also in 79 AR, so they're supposed to have left already, but they haven't. So, this just gets shoved in here, because again, she needs to have magic.
Right.
Also, Yarsil has magic, which we find out about when he says he wants to go to the school. What magic? I don't know. But he's her grandson, so he has magic.
Yep. Even though she didn't have it until literally when she was like, what, 40?
It didn't specify, but yeah, probably. She was old enough to have a grandson, so,
Right.
you know, there's that. Yeah.
50? I don't know. Maybe 60.
Who knows? But yes, he has magic as well and wants to go to a school. And so, anyway, so she deals with all of that. I don't have anything to say about that because it's just so goddamn awkward.
Yeah.
It was thrown in there that, like, that's all I have to say is that it was thrown in, it was awkward, and okay, it happened. Thank you for hitting that story beat. Let's move on to something that's actually relevant and that is interesting to read.
Yeah.
I guess. Okay. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like that was only there so that it made sense for Yarsil to go to the academy?
Well, again, these are characters that are known. So if in the Brothers War story or in the stories that follow, we know that Kayla has magic, and this is how they wanted to give you the origin of her magical powers, they did it. Check the box and move on. That's how I looked at it, right? I don't know the stories. I don't know the older stories. So maybe there are people who are big Kayla fans that are like, yeah, we finally found out how she got magic. But for those of us that are reading these stories, you're like, where the hell did this come from?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the rest of the story at all.
Right, and if she was a mage in those stories, like why did they wait until that point in this story to have her realize it? You know, like it just doesn't.
No.
make sense.
That's why I said the stories that follow, right? She's not a mage in the Brothers War because she clearly doesn't have magic during the Brothers War.
Yeah.
I'm saying in the stories that follow for sets after the fact,
Okay.
that are still set on Dominaria after the Brothers War, if they have her as a magic user. And the stories that back then don't explain how she got her powers. This may be the way to close that loop and or give her that origin story now that, you know, we're actually caring about her as a character and giving her a little bit more time to be able to tell that story. But again, you are more than welcome to let me know in the comments. Maybe we already knew this and this is a retelling. I don't actually know, but all I know is it didn't belong here.
Right.
It didn't belong.
I mean, I would argue that this doesn't tie that loop because
Tie the loop, meaning like... sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I mean, I would argue that this doesn't tie the loop because if this is the way that they actually wanted to create the origin story of her gaining magic, or even if it's not the way that they wanted to, this is the way that it happened, or is canon now.
Yeah.
And if they didn't explain it the first time around, they seemingly didn't the second time around either.
You don't think it was sufficient enough? I mean, I think it was sufficient. I just think it didn't need to be here. And it had no place in this story, right? This is not where it should have been shoehorned in. It shouldn't have been shoehorned in at all.
Right.
Right? But again, then my argument would be that at that point, right before she's about to get her magic, is where this story could have ended. And then you could have started a second story with her gaining magic, then they leave, then her grandson, then this weird section with a warlord and Teferi to tie it all in together because, again, check that box and move on. But that's what it felt like to me because it felt so out of place.
Right.
It was just like, this story needs to cover Pendragon falling, Kayla moving, Yarsil getting to the school, and tie into Teferi, Kaya, and Saheeli as well. So, you know, make sure all those things get hit and be entertaining as well.
Yeah, it's way too much.
Again.
And that's really my point, is that it feels like it came out of nowhere and doesn't belong because they needed to take more time to explain how she got the powers, where the F they came from, what she did with it, and like actually develop her character, her character, not the character in the story. I mean her character as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Develop that based on how different she is now by having those powers. And none of that was there. It was just, like you said, very shoehorned in, and it didn't make sense with the rest of the story.
Yeah.
And if they had had enough time and ability to just write that story, then maybe they could have actually given it adequate everything.
Right. Yeah.
Explanation.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, because it's not like she needed those powers to rule her people. It's not like she could have used those powers to help combat the ice or anything like that, despite the fact that it was fire magic.
Right.
It literally doesn't come up in the rest of the story. It doesn't, right? I lied. When she is talking with her grandson about the fact that the Talites are looking for witches, she makes the lights turn off and on again. That's when she uses her powers again. It's like I said.
She did it.
Like I said, if we are wrong, and you have read the older stories and it makes more sense to you, tell us, because it doesn't make sense to me at all. To me, it feels like, check off the box, we need to find out how Kayla got her powers, because we didn't do that the first time around, so now that we're going back, we might as well do it here. Okay. You did it. The box has been checked off. Thanks, I guess. It didn't belong here. Anyway, then we get to Kayla traveling with her people to the west. Finally, right? Because don't forget when I told you we got to 79 AR. Because all this other BS happened in between. But in 79 AR, she travels with her people to the west. And they have to...
10 years to decide to actually migrate.
And they have to, in the 10 years was when they found out about the lands to the west, because they wouldn't have known where to go.
Okay.
Right? In 69, they didn't know that the lands to the west technically existed.
Okay.
Right? They just assumed everybody was dealing with it.
And then the time lapse happened.
What? You were confused by the timeline? Come on, Amy. It was so clear.
Fuck me.
Anyway. She takes her people to the west, and it sounded like, which was, again, a little bit liberating, but a little bit sad at the same time, the people that stayed behind were the landlords who had been pissing and moaning that nobody was paying their rent anymore. Again, no real world comparisons there. And then those old misery bastards stayed behind counting their money and died there.
Like they deserved to.
Pissing and moaning about the fact that nobody's here to pay the money anymore and I need the money, and I could have gone with them and just started new other homes there and been an asshole there as well. But instead I stayed because, I want my money. I guess I'll just die.
Oh boy.
It's like, you do that, guy. You deserve it. Hope that works out for you. Let us know.
But yeah, that's definitely like that age-old story, right? Of like, oh, here are like the rich nobles that decide not to migrate with the plebeians because, they're better and they'll survive the terrible climate because, their castles are fortified and whatnot. And it's like, dude, you're the delicatest flower ever.
Yeah, you've never put in a... Go ahead. I was just going to say, you've never put in a hard day's work in your life.
Exactly. Like, you need a sweater when there's like a little breeze. And now you're like, I'm not moving from my beautiful chateau because I just know that, the gods will favor me and I will survive this climate change. And it's like, okay, you die on that hill because you sure are gonna.
And so when they finally get across the desert to the west and find a place, which is New Yosha, right? There's a line, again, that you asked me to write down, which again is an amazing line, of Kayla thinking, one could make a life here. A life in the wake of civilizations. But it was a life one could live rather than just survive.
Yeah. And that was a great way to sort of round out the part that we talked about before. The white hot rage, the waking up in so much pain, your lungs, your throat, your eyes, your head is just all in so much pain because of the physical affliction that happens to your body when you're in that much anguish.
Yeah.
And this is the healing moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I don't have to live just to make it through the day anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I can do something else. I can do something different.
Yeah.
I can live my life peacefully, happily, beautifully, the way I want.
And she felt that in that moment, I think, more for her people than for herself. And the herself aspect of it comes later.
Yeah.
But as she gets to a point at New Yoshia, her grandson Yarsil comes up to her, which, by the way, I was mistaken. I'm reading the story, and I'm reading the part where Yarsil's talking, and he calls her grandmama. And I was like, oh, okay, this like 5-year-old little boy that's calling her grandmama. And then she's like, Yarsil, what troubles you? Is it a lover? And I'm like, excuse me?
And then he's like, I want to go to college. Okay.
I was like, oh, okay. Because later on she's like, by all respects, he's an adult. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, okay, you know what? No actual judgments. I'm laughing because of how I interpreted the other lines of the story. Not necessarily, I'm not sitting here being like, oh, he calls his grandma grandmama. Like, no, I'm not that guy. If that's how you refer to your grandmother, congratulations. That's totally fine. When I read it, I made the assumption that he was a young child.
Yeah.
And then when she was like, are your problems a lover? I was confused and disgusted for like a moment, and then realized what was actually happening.
Yeah.
And then again, if he grew up with his grandmother because his father had passed away, okay, I get it. Like, especially as the youth of a noble or of a leader,
Yeah.
you're gonna end up being a little bit infantilized because you get to be waited on hand and foot and you don't actually have to do anything, including grow up.
Well, and you'll refer to them in a more formal manner.
Because everybody else will as well.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Of course,
Right.
Your Majesty, or whatever,
So
whatever
it's
like title she
grandmama
has. Yes.
instead of granny,
Right.
or Graham,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Again, that regalness kind of passed down.
Yeah. What I will say, though, I mentioned it earlier, and I'll mention it again. This section with Yarsil and his grandmother, Kayla, is awesome. I mean, it's just so good. It's sad.
Yeah.
I wrote heartbreaking but awesome was truly what this section was. Because he's like a little timid kid. And he's like, Grandma, I'm not coming with you. I want to go to school. And she flashes back to her son, asking her the same thing, except not to go to school, to go to war.
Right.
And she knows that leads to him dying. And she has to take the time for herself to push that fear and that prejudice, so to speak, out of her head. To say, no, there's no war. She reminds herself, there's no war. He's going to school.
Right.
He'll be okay. And so she does the nice and the noble and the good thing of giving him the permission to do so, which then you get to see the change in him as well, where he came into it all timid and afraid, And then she says yes, and he like brightens up, but then he cries because he's like, I don't want to go, but I do. Like, I don't want to say goodbye.
Right, I don't want to leave you.
Yes. And when she lets him know that it's okay, that's when he brightens up and is like, well, I've got to go do this, and I want to go do this, and I got to go, and immediately is just like a bundle of energy again. Amazing scene.
Yeah.
How good. Amazing.
Yeah. Again, it was a moment that they really could have developed more, because there's so much underlying stuff that I feel was happening in that moment that they really didn't take the time to explain more. Because again, they had to shoehorn in these other parts that didn't belong in the story.
Well, and especially because earlier on, I think this is what you're referring to. Earlier on, it specifically mentions that when Kayla is dealing with all of this nonsense, were you about to say this? Am I interrupting?
No.
Okay. When Kayla was dealing with all of this nonsense of living in Pendragon and how do I help my people and etc., the story literally tells you she doesn't even have the like ability to love her grandson anymore, even though she is his sole like blood relative guardian.
Right.
Right. Again, she's a noble. She probably has people to take care of him, but they're not related to him. They're not, it's not his grandmother. It's his nanny or whatever it is. They don't say any of that. I'm just assuming it just based on the fact that it says like she can't even muster love for her own grandson. I can speak as well in those moments. And so, yeah, I 100% agree with you. That was part of what was underlying that interaction. And if we had seen them get to interact at all prior, then maybe that would have been even more impactful, even though it was pretty damn good without. Could you imagine what it would have been with?
Yeah, I mean, that's not even close to what I was going to say.
Oh, okay, please.
So, what I was going to say was that that's a moment where they finally, like, talk about it a little bit more. Basically to say, like, okay, she went through this trauma. She figured out how to live through it this fucking far out from it.
Yeah.
And now she's, and in different moments of her life, she's having to relive those same traumas. And this is another version of that same trauma of losing her son. Now she's losing her grandson, and she has to convince herself, she has to remind herself that she's in the present. She's not in the past. And that is very much a thing when you've experienced a trauma, is when that gets triggered by something. People like to use that word a lot, but what that means is your brain goes back to that moment. And that's the moment you're living, not the moment that's happening now. And so she's living the moment where her son is going off to war when she knows that he's going to die. So, when she was originally not liking the fact that her son was going off to war, it's worse now because she's reliving that moment, but with the knowledge that he dies from that.
Yeah.
And so now she's like feeling the anguish that she felt in that moment, plus all the anguish that she felt about it after the fact, because of the result. So instead of it being this much pain, it's this much plus all of this, right?
Yeah.
And then it's probably plus a lot of other pain that's residual from the other aspects of the trauma that she's survived through for this long, right? So now it's exponential pain, right? And it's all packed into this one little moment of her grandson asking to go to college.
Timidly.
Which to most people who didn't go through all of that is this typical, innocuous, normal, safe thing.
Yeah. Maybe even fun and praiseworthy, God forbid. You know, something like that. Like,
and to her, her brain cannot tell her it's safe because all of that. So her brain is saying, not safe, not safe.
yeah.
And then she has to take the time to recognize that her brain is saying it's not safe and tell her brain, no, it's okay. This isn't war. This isn't my son. He's my grandson. We're not in a war. He's going to college. And that's great for him. And that will be beneficial. But she has to have that moment. And the moment just before it. And the moment just before that. Because the initial moment is the moment where her brain says, nope, not safe. Then the next moment is her having to think about it longer instead of just telling him, yes, of course you can go to college. She has to think about it longer. And then she has to make the choice to tell her brain that's saying it's not safe, yes, it is. And then her brain has to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
and don't forget what happens after, right? He gets excited, like I said, he gets excited about like what he gets to do or wants to do or whatever next. And what we hear about from Kayla is she's happy about this occurring, but also the next morning she's gone.
Yeah.
She leaves. So like you said, what's going on in her head there? Is that happiness? Is it? Because my assumption is that because this is kind of a two-part story, right? We read the end, now we're reading the beginning, and it's both, they both work with one another. What we heard from Kayla during the end, when she was so upset with Tanos, at the beginning of the end, sorry, it's confusing for me too, she mentions how she's pissed off at Tanos, basically, for multiple reasons, but one of which, unfortunately, is because he's the one who's there to be pissed off at. But that she's putting on him the fact that this war, this cataclysm, took her husband, her son, her father, her people, her cities, like, all of these things were taken away from her, and because Tanos is in front of her, she's blaming him, but she's lost.
Like you said before, too, morale, quality of life for her people.
Yeah. She's lost so much of what she was, or what her past life was. Then, when the fire occurs, right? Tanos didn't light it, a fire happened. Then she loses Tanos, which she says, like, he took away the last bit of what was left, because not only did he leave, and he was her connection to her old life, and to Urza, and to Harbin, and to the war, and, but when he lit that fire, he burned away every last bit of work of Urza's that, even though it was horrific, it was still a remnant of her husband.
Yeah.
As she maybe remembered him and cared for him during the time that he was doing those things. Maybe that's a memory for her.
Yeah. And even if it's a bad memory for her, that doesn't mean that she doesn't want to be able to experience it on occasion.
Exactly.
Because it's still a memory of her husband who she lost.
Exactly.
You know, and a grieving process doesn't necessarily allow you to separate the pain and hatred from the love
Yeah.
and happy memories, because they're all part of the experience with that person that you lost.
Yep. Yeah, so all of that, right, contributes to the fact that then the next morning, after Yarsil is gone, and again, her only remaining connection to her son now, right? Or maybe she has things of his, who knows? I doubt it. But a strong piece of a connection to her son, that now she has to accept that her son is gone. Well, maybe she doesn't have to accept it. She just leaves. And when she leaves, she's now traveling further west towards her old home. Because again, underlying, not stated outright, maybe there's a bit of nostalgia there, a bit of homesickness, something to bring her back to what she lost all of up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, what I said when you read that part was, yeah, of course she's leaving before the dawn. If he's left, there's nothing left to keep her there anymore.
Yep.
And so where's she gonna go? She's gonna go to wherever she used to live, because maybe there's something there.
Well, and she's curious about how it looks now because of years being away and the cataclysm and again and right?
And maybe she really felt like that was her home years and years ago, before her life completely uprooted itself and became something that she didn't necessarily want or ask for.
Yeah.
So she's going back.
By the way, pun absolutely intended. There is a nod when it comes to where Yarsil is going to school. There's a nod to the fact that he's going to be taught by these teachers named Nod and Duck, which, if people are unaware, we only learned recently. Ashnod, who was Mishra's apprentice during the war, goes by Nod now, and Tawnos, Ashnod calls Tawnos Duck. And so Nod and Duck are Ashnod and Tawnos, who have finally gotten together, right? Apprentice of Mishra, apprentice of Urza. They get together, they form a school, and Yarsil is going to go to that school. So, there again, like I said, pun absolutely intended. There's a little nod there to that. Kayla realizes, oh, he's going to go be taught by Tawnos, and you mentioned that she even says, like, let Headmaster Duck know about me.
Right. And to me that meant, know that I'm still alive. Know that I know he's alive.
Yep.
And know that I now forgive him when I didn't before. And forgive myself when I didn't before. So I forgive him for the blame that I placed on him that wasn't founded. I forgive him for originally causing war with Urza. And I forgive myself for causing war a second time.
And she's showing that forgiveness by again entrusting him with the care of someone that she loves.
Yeah.
Because the last time, when Harbin died, she blamed him for that death, him being Tawnos. And yet is now saying, here's my grandson,
right.
I'm trusting you with taking care of him.
And said, you spent more time with Urza than I did in our marriage, so.
Yeah.
So he is this pivotal figure in her life of someone who is a constant companion, essentially, of the men that she loves in her life. And that presents itself in different ways, depending on the generation of man that you're referring to, yeah. And that statement proves that she realizes that now. And that it's not about her hating him for these things anymore.
Right.
Now it's about her understanding that he was this important figure in the the fate of her existence.
Yeah.
Essentially. So, like I said, there's a lot of depth to that could have been provided had the story had the chance to provide that depth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it means that we can take a lot of time in this video to provide analysis of it,
yep.
right? But what it doesn't necessarily mean is that everyone's able to come to these conclusions, because maybe the audience doesn't have the time or the ability to dig all of that information out of subtext, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they don't feel like they want to if the story seems not as good as it could be because of the fact that they're cramming all this stuff in. Again.
And I technically forgot to mention, but also, like, for analysis purposes, it's not super important, but this whole section of her and her grandson and all of what comes from that, that's technically in 80 AR as opposed to 79 AR. It's a year difference, but they did make the distinction, so for people who are following along here and are not reading the story, just realize that that happened a year later. And then the 80 AR section ends with Kayla leaving, and we follow Kayla at this point as she is traveling further west toward Old Yoshia / Krug, and she's on a boat or a transport with the Talites. And so she is at first a little upset because the Talites are these cultists, that's the word I was looking for, that assaulted her at Pendragon, that maybe she feels led to all this nonsense in the first place, despite the fact that there's a lot of blame to go around, for sure. And at first she's like a little bit hesitant, but eventually okay with them getting on this transport with her. And in fact, she even says, these Talites have no idea who she is, nor does it seem like they care to know who she is. And that's how she prefers it.
Yeah.
And the last line of that section of 80 AR is that Kayla bin Krug is finally free.
Yeah.
Because she's not with basically any of her people anymore. She's with Talites who don't even know who she is anymore. She mentions to Yarsil when they're talking that she's an older woman at this point. And so even though these Talites are hunting witches, of which she is one by their definition, seemingly, it's irrelevant because she's going to go to this area and try to live out her days, I suppose. Now, again...
And because she's done placing blame on others, she's just going to live her life now.
Yep. And again, because we don't have the context, I can ask for some help again. Because if you all know, I mean, that's the last we hear of Kayla in this story. Now, obviously, if she comes up in the next 3 stories, then don't say anything about it in the comments if you've read all the stories already, because we'll get there organically over the next 2 weeks or so. But if not, then that's the end of her in this story. So are there other stories from Dominarian history where she comes up where, again, it's relevant to know that she has fire magic and etc., which is why it was shoved in here, because as there was more to this story, because that's not the end of this story, that's just the end of Kayla, which I thought was odd, because they did a little tie-in where it was like, okay, Kayla is going to Krug now, to Old Yoshia, and she is hearing about the warlord who is in charge of Krug at this point. Was there more you had to say on that? Okay. Warlord Fask. And she's hearing about Warlord Fask and how terrible he is, and yet he was the fairest of them, right? Not the fairest of them all in the mirror thing, although that is technically what they said. No, was that he's the fairest of the villains or whatever.
The nicest. Despite the fact that he's terrible.
He's still a warlord. But he's the fairest of the warlords. And They said he only demands 4 of 10 is what is the phrase that they used, that like of every 10 things you give 4 to him and his loyalists receive benefits from that or whatever. But so they then go into talking about Warlord Fask. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, you know, now they're getting to this point of like he's super paranoid and there's the Warlord and the Ghost, and that's like a big like horror story, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like a legend or something like that, right? Fairy tale or something. And so I'm thinking all throughout the time where it's talking about the Warlord in his bed and he hears this noise and he's paranoid, but you know, it's going to be the end of him, which means I think he's dying here. I'm like, oh, okay, so Kayla is sneaking in and she's going to use her fire powers and kill him. Because again, why wouldn't I think that the story that's been following Kayla for 2 full stories wouldn't end with following Kayla? It doesn't. It just uses the fact that Kayla is going to this area to tell you about this Warlord so that we can tie in the Gatewatch members.
Right.
And so, speaking of which, Fask thinks he's going crazy, and he's set up these strings with noisemakers around his room so that if somebody tries to sneak in and assassinate him, which is what he's afraid of, or partially afraid of, it'll jangle and wake him up, and so he can, what he does, throw the bedsheet off, grab his sword, and kill them. Whoever they are, trying to kill him. But remembers back to an oracle that he kills, and the oracle swears that he will die because the sword thrusts that he made against the oracle will be returned to him 1,000-fold. And so he's paranoid that he's going to be killed by some supernatural force. And so sure enough, when he sees the man with the short hair and the short cropped hair and the short facial hair at the foot of his bed in like, you know, a ghostly whatever, he's like, oh my God, it's finally come for me. And he drops to his knees and he's screaming and he's clawing at his face and
he's covering his eyes.
And yeah, dropping his sword in the process and covering his eyes. And his guards come in to help him, and that's it. That's what we hear about the Warlord.
Right.
Like, some of them just leave because they're like, forget this dude. He sucks.
They're like, oh, this again? There's nothing here.
Yeah. It's the boy who cried wolf scenario.
Yeah.
Until we find out, because sure enough, I did predict it. Now, I may or may not have, in scrolling through to see how goddamn long the story is, I may or may not have seen that Teferi and Kaya were in this story in general, but I didn't know that that ghostly figure was in fact Teferi. But it seems like the time travel shenanigans that Teferi is using or doing with Saheeli, they brought in Kaya for it, firstly, and secondly, she is allowing him to be a ghostly figure in that space. And he finds out that they didn't go back far enough. Because again, we're in the Brothers' War, right? That's not the Brothers' War. This is 11 years after or something insane like that. Because this is 85 AR. And so now the story ends with a grandfather telling his grandchildren that story of the Warlord and the Ghost. And the kids loving hearing about it. And they're in the Ice Age at the time that he's telling them this story. And the story mentions that even by the time the grandchildren are old and have died, they will still be in the Ice Age.
Yeah.
So that's a way to kind of like look way forward. So I said this last time, I was very wrong. I assume the next story that we read that is a main story as opposed to a side story will be us in the Brothers' War, because I guess they will have recalibrated their time nonsense.
I guess.
Did you want to say anything on any of this stuff?
So weird. You did say you didn't know it was Teferi, but you pretty much knew because you like looked over at the Teferi picture and you were like, it sounds like that's the description they're giving.
Yep.
So.
But what I want to know is, especially, or I guess specifically from folks who are knowledgeable about the older Dominaria stories, is this Warlord and the Ghost thing, is that new? Right? This seems to me like a bit of a hint at the fact that it's time travel. If you mess with things in the past, you're going to change the timeline. Or is the Warlord and the Ghost just like assumed to be an old wives' tale or something, and this is how it originated? Was because it actually happened back then, and we're hearing about the origins of it now, right? This indicates to me that this is the first of, hopefully not too many, but, you know, maybe if it makes the story interesting, many instances where they being the Gatewatch, Teferi, Kaya, and Saheeli so far, will be messing with time and messing with the timeline of Dominaria in the process. Yeah. We will have to wait and see, because the next story that we do will be Side Story 1, and the side stories are also known, I was very surprised by this, but are also being referred to as the present day stories. So they'll be going over what's going on present day in addition to what's going on in the Brothers' world.
Wow.
Very, very interesting, and this is the way that they're tying that in. Again, shoehorning it in at the end of this story is rough as hell.
It's weird,
because the story was long enough, and you had 2 full stories of Kayla's story, and then, again, they have done this in the past, so I'm trying not to be too hypocritical about like, oh, well, it sucks that you did this, but then in other stories, it's like, it was cool that you had that little bookend there. I guess it's just because the story was so long.
Yeah.
That, like, now you're adding in what essentially is the urban legend is the goddamn words I was looking. I'm so sorry, everybody. But you shoehorn in an urban legend of a warlord in a way to tie in the Gatewatch, so that when we go to the side stories, which are the next things that were released, like that makes more sense for us. But you did it at the end of a story that was amazing and long and contained shoehorned elements, and now you're going to shoehorn another thing in there at the end to tie in for your next story as well. It's rough.
Yeah.
It was rough. The story was incredible.
Yeah.
Because again, look at all the analysis that we got to discuss with regards to Kayla, her development from the beginning of the end, to the end of the beginning. Like, all of that was super well done. So, I mean, shout outs to Miguel Lopez, right? I mean, obviously, he's got more of these stories to write, but these were great.
But, yeah, I mean, with all the things he had to put in here, I honestly don't really know how he did it.
Same. Same.
And I don't appreciate it because of that. Because all that means is that the story could have been amazing. And it didn't get to be because of all that he put in there. And it still was pretty good considering that. And like I said, that means that it could have been incredible had it been a story that actually made sense.
Okay, interesting. So, I mean, I genuinely want to know what other people think. Firstly, I'll say it this way. Being able to say that a story has amazing sections to it and shoehorn sections, that the writing is good, and that the characterization is good, but that there are things that can be fixed, and then saying, hey, do you agree, do you disagree, let us know. I think that's a really great way for all of you to join us as we show off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. And so, as I was alluding to and or flat out saying, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Did you like this story? Did you dislike this story? Did you not think the story was long? Did you think it was the exact perfect length? Did you not think those sections were shoehorned in? Do you know the older stories or not? All of those things we want to know, because I want to hear from you. Truly, we want to hear. So,
yeah, and I know I say that every single time, but this one I really mean it. I really want to hear what you guys have to say about this one, just because there's so much going on.
Yeah, agreed.
I really want something from you guys if you can.
Yeah. Definitely let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. We always want to hear from you on literally anything that we do, but like this is the one, these are the shows that we are trying to turn into more of a discussion.
Right.
And so we would love to hear more from you on that. Leave that in the comments. Thank you so much. Please don't forget, as I mentioned at the top, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you'll get notifications whenever more of these jars come out. We would like them to be Monday and Thursday, but I can't make any promises just because there's so much to do and they shove all these things right down our throats so quickly. But we are doing our best, and thank you for your patience and for your support because, again, likes and shares go a very long way as well, and we would love to see you on stream Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern. I didn't mention earlier, Monday streams are Magic the Gathering. We play MTG Arena, so we would love to have you come join us, and most of the time we ain't talking about what we're playing, so you are more than welcome to come and talk about Magic Story, your lives, whatever the case may be. We would love to have you. So please don't hesitate to join us. Like I said, Mondays and Fridays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. Pre-release is coming up sooner than you think, so stay tuned for that as well. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.